Tensions on the Korean Peninsula heighten as the DPRK demolishes a liaison office for inter-Korean talks. The move followed the severing of communications with South Korea. So what happened to the new era of peace both countries declared in 2018? And why have inter-Korean relations taken such a swift downturn? The latest developments, a turning point in relations between the two countries. And what are the prospects for resumed peace talks? To talk about these issues and more, I'm joined by Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow of China Institute of International Studies, CGTN correspondent Joseph Kim, and Sung-Young Lee, a Kim Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Well, the DPRK has just blown up the joint liaison office for inter-Korean talks near the border between the two countries. So let me start with you, Mr. Yang. What are the military and the political implications of this?
Well, I think the latest activity, like blown up the building, has been the second action after the very tough statement by Ms. Kim Yoo-jung. I believe after the first action is the place the People's Army on full alert. This is the second. I believe after the second, there will be the third, maybe fourth, and the fifth. And what is the purpose? I don't think all the pressure actions were designed to launch a war, but designed to make pressures on Seoul, to force Seoul to make a choice between U.S. position against DPRK or position cooperating with North Korea to implement the agreements and documents made by the two Koreas 2 years ago. Basically, purpose lies in the pressure, not lies in a real war.
And Joseph, the building was actually demolished after the DPRK blamed the South for failing to stop defectors from sending balloons filled with anti-DPRK leaflets across the border. Why did the South Korean allow those defectors to do that, and how often do they do it?
Well, there's been regular movement from South Korean activists. You mentioned that they are the DPRK defectors, but by South Korean constitution, they are South Korean citizens. So these South Korean activists have regularly sent these leaflets, anti-Pyongyang leaflets, across the border. And this has constantly caused some friction, especially because those leaflets have criticisms of the DPRK leadership and how they are conducting their leadership within that country. In terms of why hasn't South Korea done anything, we did hear from South Korea saying that they are going to push a law to ban activities to send these propaganda leaflets across the border. They also did promise the DPRK that they would do so. However, this doesn't seem to have been sufficient for Pyongyang as well as the top brass there.
When they promised that, did they foresee that it will have such kind of a strong blowback from the North?
Well, if we look at the response that's come out of South Korea, we see that it's been very strong, something that we haven't seen before. So we can't really gauge whether or not South Korea was expecting such a response. But we do know that they are taking it very seriously. Under South Korean President Moon Jae-in, there's been a regular movement and effort to try to improve bilateral relationships with the DPRK. But this time around, they're condemning the DPRK statement as well as the criticisms that DPRK leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong had against President Moon, saying that they'll no longer tolerate these type of actions as well as words from the leadership. Therefore, we do see South Korea taking stronger measures, especially with the Defense Ministry also coming out and saying that there will be a price to pay if the DPRK does take any military action.
All right, and we've also gathered some internet opinions on the internet on the response and what happened at the border. There are a lot of different ideas of why and what the consequences will be. Jin Lee said this isn't really about the civilian activists sending leaflets into North Korea. That was just a pretext to pick a fight. Pyongyang clearly has an agenda for a show of strength in June and is methodically and dramatically carrying it out. So, Mr. Yang, do you think those leaflets sent by balloons by the defectors are sufficient reasons enough for such a response to blow the liaison office in the north?
No, actually, the leaflets incident played a role as a trigger for the current explosive situation. In fact, besides the very provocative leaflet activity, Pyongyang has been strongly disappointed against Seoul for a long time. Before this escalation of tension, the deadlock had been there already between Seoul and Pyongyang. And the dissatisfaction from Pyongyang against Seoul had been rising fast, basically because Seoul hasn't been doing enough for implementing the agreements, especially cooperation in economic areas with the North, although they have signed several documents about that. So basically, one reason is the very, the leaflets activity, but the second more important reason is the dissatisfaction and angry at Seoul about their inefficiency of the cooperation with the North.
Mr. Lee, do you agree this is actually DPRK sending a strong message to the South and probably to the rest of the world about their dissatisfaction with the status quo?
Yes, as Mr. Yang mentioned, and as Kim Yo-jong, the sister, issued in a lengthy statement this morning, Wednesday morning, she herself said this is merely the prelude. The demolition job, which was visually arresting, visually stunning, it overwhelms the senses, visual, auditory, and even, I imagine, olfactory senses, seeing all the smoke go up like that. It has a psychological impact, and it's the first step in North Korea's strategy of graduated escalation, putting more and more pressure on South Korea with perhaps military provocations in the coming days, leading up to the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War next week on June 25th. And then, in time, North Korea will turn to trying to tame, to influence President Trump as he gears up in the last, less than 5 months now before the presidential election in November. So I think North Korea has a very carefully laid out strategy of psychological pressure, maximum pressure on South Korea first, and then on the United States. And, we'll just have to wait and see. But it seems that South Korea is quite vulnerable and helpless at this point.
And Joseph, obviously, South Korea has already felt the pressure. According to Reuters, South Korean Unification Minister Kim Yo-jong, who oversees inter-Korean relations, has offered to step down. So what will South Korea do in response?
Well, we've heard from the presidential office saying that they would like to resolve this issue through communication and cooperation. However, they've said that they would also take stronger measures if necessary. While it has been noted that South Korea is in a vulnerable situation, or that South Korea really has nowhere left to go at the current moment, we also have to realize that there is a point of opportunity for the DPRK, whether they want reconciliation with the South or not. Having a president like President Moon Jae-in within the South Korean administration and leadership is also a great opportunity for the DPRK as he tries to continue efforts to improve relationships. And if we look at the projects that he's been trying to seek out, even though, as it has been mentioned, they haven't come to fruition due to sanctions, There is a $35 billion railway that would connect South Korea to the DPRK as well as Asia and Europe. But if these things do not go through, then it could also mean that inter-Korean relations breaking down could also be problematic for the DPRK in the long run, because we don't know what will happen in the next election in South Korea, what type of leader will come in, and what their policies will be. So if they don't capitalize on this situation as well, it could also be detrimental to the DPRK.
Ms. Yang, to that point, actually DPRK cannot expect a better president in South Korea than the current president, because he is supportive of reconciliation. Then what is the goal of North Koreans doing all these?
Well, very interesting thing is, Kim Jong-un, North Korea made huge pressure on South Korea government after the ruling party gained a big victory in the previous midterm election in the parliament. That means the ruling party has got a stronger position in the legislation body in South Korea. So given that background, the expectation from the Pyongyang to Seoul has been higher than before. See, now the logic is, now that you have a stronger position on the legislation part, so you can do something greater than before. Unfortunately, Moon Jae-in government hadn't done enough from Pyongyang's point of view. So at this point, they make use of this trigger, say the leaflet activity, to make a pressure so that they can force Moon to make a choice. Let me put it by this way. If Moon administration take substantive action in the cooperation in economic projects like Inter-Korean Railway by breaking some sanction regime, I'm sure the escalation of tension will suddenly stop and the improvement of the two Koreas will return quickly. If Moon administration continue the existing position on following U.S. sanction policy and the regime, I'm sure the further tougher actions, following actions from Pyongyang will come. So that is the tactics of Pyongyang. Say, you make a choice. If you go good direction with us, and the escalation will be stopped and the situation will turn good. If you go wrong direction, then the situation will go in worse. But the problem for Seoul is, if they choose the side of Pyongyang, then the bad situation with the United States will come, and vice versa.
So Mr. Lee, as Mr. Yang just explained, probably Mr. President Moon is now stuck in the bind because he cannot persuade the United States to ease on sanctions. He cannot go alone to build the inter-Korean railways. He has very few alternatives.
That's right. And I think President Moon may have overextended or even exaggerated things to the North Koreans in perhaps promising them that he will spearhead the effort to link the inter-Korean railway, to resume the Kaesong industrial complex that South Korea shut down in early 2016, that used to employ about 50,000 North Korean workers in this industrial complex. The problem is, yes, the United States is against it, but it's actually the UN, technically, in a legal sense, that prohibits such activities. Under UN Security Council Resolution 2375, paragraph 18, the Security Council prohibits joint ventures between North Korea and any other UN member state, and of course South Korea is a member state, unless that joint venture proposal is approved by the UN panel of experts. So this is something that China supported, that Russia supported, that virtually every UN member state supported 3 years ago. Now, there are, of course, ways of ignoring sanctions violations, but the U.S. position for now is firm, and that is the thorn, the impediment in South Korea achieving its promises to North Korea.
I'd also like to spend a little time on the trigger of this event. Joseph, why the defectors, as you mentioned, they are South Korean citizens, want to use this occasion to send balloons with anti-DPRK slogans, or is this become a common practice all year round?
Well, I've spoken to some of the activists who have sent over those leaflets, and some of them say that this is what they're meant to do, especially because many of them have left the DPRK and they hold certain animosities towards the DPRK and how they were treated when they were living north of the border. In terms of whether they chose this time to do it, I don't believe that this was a strategic move by those activists, but that this was something commonly practiced by them to continue to send these leaflets, especially since we have seen a decrease in how the border situation has been. Before, we've seen when tensions were high, that South Korea would continue to blast propaganda loudspeakers across the border into the north, or have other ways of psychological tensions with the DPRK. However, as tensions have been resolved since 2018 and the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, we've seen that to have decreased to a certain degree. But these activists have continued to send those leaflets across the border, especially because they're convicted to continue to do this practice.
So, Ms. Yang, do you think the South Korean government can do something in order to avoid infuriating the North by keeping some kind of control over those defectors doing things that will trigger such kind of thing?
Well, I'm afraid that the room for South Korean government play is very, very limited. In my observation, all the Seoul administration can do lies in two fronts. On one hand, Seoul Moon administration has been playing tactics try to calming down the situation by calling for self-retreatment, calling for restoring the communication and so on, keep a low profile against the Pyongyang's tough activities. However, on the other hand, Seoul also play another area by strengthening their military readiness in case of the military attack from the north. So basically, by the two-hand tactics, Seoul can try every effort to make the situation under control. But I believe the decisive variables does not lie in what Seoul can do, but lies in what Pyongyang can do and Washington can do. Actually, Pyongyang is the activities taken by Pyongyang not only designed to Seoul but also designed to Washington D.C.
Concerning what Pyongyang can do, Joseph, we understand that over the first half of this year, the situation in DPRK was extremely dire because of sanctions and also the impact of COVID-19. How difficult is North Korean economy doing, and how desperate are the people there?
Well, according to South Korean analysts that I've spoken to here, they've told me that one of the reasons that the DPRK has taken such drastic and dramatic measures in recent days is because of the situation that they're facing with the economy, and in order to try to draw attention away from the situation that's happening, especially because the DPRK is claiming that they have 0 coronavirus cases still. We don't know whether or not that's true, especially because outside experts can't really go inside and confirm this situation. But if that is the situation, then that means that the DPRK currently is at a standstill in terms of its economy, and that there could be grumblings within the domestic situation that would call for a reason for the DPRK to show its strength and really try to reconsolidate its power within the state to make such statements and to make such visual statements in terms of blowing up the liaison office.
And Mr. Lee, so you earlier mentioned the strategy of DPRK. So how economic constrained are the North Koreans right now? And what are the end goal of DPRK?
Well, the ultimate end goal, North Korea tells us, is to complete the revolution, that is to unify the Korean Peninsula, I would have to assume, on its own terms. But that's a long way off from this moment. But in the short term, I see the emergence of Kim Yo-jong, or rather, her dramatic personality change. It's really stunning. You know, she went from a gracious, polite young lady, attractive woman when she visited South Korea on the eve of the opening of the Pyeongchang Olympics in February 2018 to now playing the role of the malicious bad cop. Her foul language is stunning. Just today, she called Moon Jae-in an idiot, a retard, a flunky, craven, mentally ill. Why is that? Well, I see the Kim brother and sister playing two different roles. For now, Kim Yo-jong playing the role of the bad cop, thus bolstering her credentials at home, while Kim Jong-un sits back. And when the time comes again for diplomacy, for outreach, perhaps Kim Jong-un will resume that role. But the ascendance of Kim Yo-jong in the North Korean political system is very dramatic and probably has implications. I think North Korea is making a contingency plan.
But this kind of
a
a
B,
play, bad
Kim Jong-un
cop,
is ill.
good cop, is it to try to reconciliate with the South Korea, or to confront with South Korea?
Well, taming South Korea, exerting its influence over South Korea is always in North Korea's interest, and North Korea wields both the carrot and stick, and we see a lot of stick right now. But eventually, North Korea will go back to dangling the carrot before South Korea. But to have Kim Yo-jong play this role, this very unattractive role, who's spewing out invective towards South Korea virtually every day, what does that mean? I think North Korea is really trying to bolster Kim Yo-jong, to bring her up as almost equal to the supreme leader.
And Mr. Yang, last Friday marked the second anniversary of the first Trump-Kim summit. In retrospect, did that historic meeting make anything different, do you think? And is that part of the reasons why the DPRK is going so aggressive at this moment?
Well, let me put it by this way. They make a very tough statement on the very meaningful date, say the second anniversary of the Singapore joint statement issuing. And that means that sends two signals. On one hand, Pyongyang sent a very strong signal against Seoul, plus Washington. But on the other hand, given the background of the second anniversary of the statement, that indicates from Pyongyang, say they remain highly value the statement, the principles set by the statement. So the dual signals means if you go the continue hostile policy direction, Pyongyang will do something more provocative. If you return to the statement made in Singapore 2 years ago, then everything could be fine quickly.
But that depends on the reaction from the United States. Do you think the United States right now in the thick of COVID-19 has the will and the logistics to gather another meeting or doing something substantially?
I'm afraid not. Washington cannot go back to negotiation table with Pyongyang before the early November, because Pyongyang, on one hand, Pyongyang has set very high precondition for the returning negotiation. Say, you, the United States, must submit a substantive proposal satisfied with Pyongyang's preconditions, say, removing all sanctions framed by the 5 UNSC resolutions, and then we can negotiate about the nuclear issue. And on the other hand, during the campaign period, I don't think Trump administration have energy and the interest to make a concession or compromise to meet Pyongyang's very high precondition. So basically, neither side have ready for compromising. So no possibility for any talks or negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang, and the deadlock will continue. So the deadlock between Pyongyang and Seoul will continue either.
So the key question is, will DPRK understand the deadlock will remain? Mr. Lee, DPRK's Foreign Minister Ri Sung-gon issued a commemorative statement on the summit's anniversary, expressing disappointment and vowed to build up the country's military to counter U.S. threats. What exactly does that mean? Will DPRK even consider a plan to resume nuclear tests and missile tests anytime soon?
I think so, because the North Korean foreign minister explicitly made the threat of conducting a hydrogen bomb test over the Pacific when he visited New York in September 2017. And the mood in those days was very different, of course. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission, Trump said a few days before that, threat by the North Korean foreign minister. Will North Korea move toward another nuclear test, an ICBM test? I think it makes sense for North Korea to do something like that before the presidential election in early November, because even if it's Joe Biden who takes office next year, North Korea would have made its point that we are to be reckoned with, that we cannot be easily swayed. You have to deal with us. And the way to deal with us is through conventional diplomacy, perhaps more concessions in the form of sanctions relief. And that message will be a stone cold reality. It will resonate. And the next administration will have to deal with that new reality. And I think that's in North Korea's interest.
And Mr. Yang, do you agree? Probably the North Koreans are considering raising the stakes at negotiations, whoever they're talking to when the November election is over.
Well, I don't think North Korea have an interest in negotiation before early November, because no one knows who will be the next president of the United States. And also, before November, I'm afraid North Korea will continue to do something to escalate the tension. But just now you mentioned the nuclear test. I don't think the probability of new nuclear test will be high.
What about low range, middle range, and long range missile tests?
Ballistic missile tests highly possible, and as well satellite launch highly possible.
And Joseph, are South Koreans bracing up for maybe more provocations from the north?
Yes, we've definitely heard from the South Korean government, from the defense ministry to the presidential office, saying that they would respond strongly to any further provocations from the DPRK. One thing we also have to note is that the DPRK flatly rejected South Korea's offer to send special envoys to the DPRK to try to defuse the situation. But by rejecting it, we see an overt message by Pyongyang saying that they aren't going to defuse the situation at the current moment, and that at the current moment, the inter-Korean relations look to be tense for the time being, which is the first time we've seen since 2018, when reconciliation efforts started at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics.
Yes, indeed. When the world is dealing with COVID-19, inter-Korean relations is at a low point. Well, thank you very much, Joseph, Mr. Yang, and Mr. Lee. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Cho in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.